I did want to upload this a bit earlier since now Dawning is out on, I think, Asia servers, soon Europe, and then America still has a while to go. But today I'm going to be talking about Heng Permansor Terrae and his dupe levels and also Lightcone, talking about if you yourself should actually end up pulling for any dupes or even going for his Lightcone. This video will exclusively talk about mainly his Lightcone and also his E1, but I will touch upon his E2 since it is really strong and definitely worth noting about. Talking about mainly why they are really strong investments, and then what both that players should consider pulling for it if they maybe use certain characters a lot. I will have scenarios that you should consider. Before I get into the video, be sure to check out the description to join the Discord server. It's mainly gacha related like Starro, but there are other channels like a general chat and also another gaming channel for non-gacha related things. Anyway, let's get back into the video. So I'm going to start with this S1 as it is just one Lightcone option as opposed to two dupes. So his Lightcone does provide a massive 64% stat stick to attack, provides a HP restore when using ultimate by 10% of the wearer's attack, and an additional 10% based off the wearer's attack to the character with the lowest current HP on the team. It also grants a buff to all allies called Redoubt for 3 turns, and targets with Redoubt will deal 24% increased damage, which will further amplify by 12% if the target does have summons. So for Redoubt, most characters on the team, so Dawning himself, I think, your 2 supports or whatever you're running are going to get the 24% increased damage, but the main DPS you do dedicate as bondmate and attach the Soul Dragon to will get the full effect because Dawning attaching Soul Dragon and dedicating that character as bondmate will be considered as having a summon, which is why using Ban and Amusement actually works when you are running with Dawning specifically. So they are able to get the full 36% increased damage. So outside of the supportive capabilities, it provides a massive attack stick for Dawning, which is going to significantly increase the strength of his shield, and will further increase the bondmate's attack as well, since the buff does scale off Dawning's own attack, so it's not only increasing the shield strength, but also the buff. The emergency heal right now is not going to be super needed on the Lightcone just because Dawning's shields are super strong. But in cases, maybe you're early game so you don't have like a crazy Dawning, or you're in really hard end game like Anomaly where they do a lot of damage and potentially might break the shield. If they end up breaking your shield and you end up getting low, this emergency heal can actually function as something useful. So this Lightcone is not only beefing up his shields by a lot, but also providing him good buffing capabilities by increasing damage and also increasing his attack buff by increasing his own attack. The main value of this Lightcone outside of all it provides though is the fact that it is one of his only actual usable options. Preservation is a really weird path. The main first sustain we got was HP scaling, the second one was Aventuring that was defense scaling, and now the third one is attack scaling. Most of the Lightcones are orientated on defense percent, and Dawning's shield scaling off attack makes him unable to use nearly every option. So his signature Lightcone is one of the 2 Lightcones that actually do properly work on him. The only other one is the Battle Pass Lightcone Journey Forever Peaceful, which increases the shield effect provided by wear, and will also increase damage for the allies that do have shields. That is only his other option that does actually work, and if you have neither of those, your next best option is to use the Lightcone that has the highest basic attack, so a 5-star with really high base attack. Since, again, you really have no other option, as other Lightcones will mainly provide stuff like defense percent, which Dawning technically can use if he is, having his shield broken so he can be a little tankier, but it's not what his shield scales off of and is not what you want to prioritize at all. So unfortunately, Dawning's signature Lightcone is like his one of 2 usable options. Thankfully, it's a lot less impactful since it's not like you're increasing his damage significantly as opposed to the remembrance issue with HP Lightcones. Running a high base attack Lightcone on Dawning, especially combined with the relic set that increases shield effect, isn't going to be a lot and probably enough to properly sustain anyways, but that's why his Lightcone actually has a lot of value, more than some people seem to give it. Now on the flip side, his E1, which will allow him to recover a skill point when using ultimate, and will also increase Bondmate's alt-type res pen by 18% for 3 turns. Dante is best in slot sustain for 2 specific teammates that I'm going to mention that are DPSs. One is Finon and the other is Anoxa. On these teams, in certain cases outside of Finon's ultimate, you may run into skill point issues because on this team you are frequently spamming skill with the DPS themselves and also Ceridra. Sometimes the skill gen of another action advance on the team might not be enough, so this Eidolon providing an extra skill point in his ultimate can actually be a lot more beneficial than it seems. But the main value for it is, of course, the 18% all-type res pen increase. Why is this so valuable? Is because it is a rare buff. All-type res pen is something that both Phynon and Anaxa especially love because they don't have an insane amount of it in their kit. So an 18% with practically permanent uptime, because you can get an ultimate every 3 turns with Daneng, makes this actually a very, very, very valuable Eidolon, as it further amplifies his own buffing capabilities to further amplify his spawn as the best install sustain for these teams. And even outside of them, if you're not using him with Anaxa or Phynon specifically, it doesn't matter because any character is going to love the all-type res pen. Not every character is going to be able to benefit too much from his attack buff. Maybe they have an oversaturated attack set, you have attack buffers on the team, maybe even. Or you're running him with some whack setup where the person you are really using isn't even scaling off attack, in which case you wouldn't do. That's really depending on what whack thing you're trying to do. The all-type res pen is universally loved, and the skill point is also going to be universally loved outside of teams that potentially just use basic attack, which is why it's also very, very valuable. It's also a really strong stepping stone to his E2, which is also a very disgusting dupe. His E2 additionally increases the number of actions of the enhanced Soul Dragon by 2. Using ultimate gives Soul Dragon a 100% action advance. Soul Dragon taking action, the additional damage dealt by Bondment becomes 200% of the original damage, and the shield effect provided in that instance becomes 200% of the original shield effect. So this Eidolon is really strong for a multitude of reasons. Unfortunately, it doesn't provide anything for Bondmate specifically as opposed to E1, but it is just really strong for what it does. 2 additional enhanced Soul Dragon actions is going to be insanely good for not only damage but also just overall capabilities. The 100% action advance is going to allow you to refresh your shield practically instantly, since again it's just going to go right away after using ultimate. Additional damage dealt by Bondmate becomes 200% of the original damage. We all know how broken scaling off original damage is. If you're doing good damage on the original damage, getting an original damage increase is going to amplify that by way more than generic buffs. And now you're going to get a much more beefier shield, because Danek's shield at E1 and below is already insanely tanky. 200% of the original shield effect is going to make it practically unbreakable. Anything that isn't a one-shot is going to survive because it's just going to be that strong. This Eidolon is insane for not only Soul Dragon's damage, it's also fantastic for his sustaining capabilities, which will already make to the character that doesn't really have any problem sustaining, make it even more. So potentially in the future, he's going to have an even longer run without having problems of sustaining because of how strong it is, which is also why it is an insanely valuable dupe. Now, a common question that is going to be asked is, should I get E1 or S1? Personally, I still do think E1 has more value. The extra skill point and the increased buffing capabilities of 18% all-type res pen is great. The Lightcone, while it's still valuable, it doesn't have an insane big use as opposed to running the Battle Pass one, especially if you do have the Battle Pass one and you slowly get it to S5 if you haven't already. I can't remember exactly if you can right now, but if you are working towards it, then the gap shrinks even more. But even then, using any other high base attack option is going to be fine on Daneng, just because he is able to gain a really strong shield, and even with those kind of Lightcones, his shield is really strong. It's not like you're really trying to amplify his own personal damage, because his own personal damage is not going to be good. So the damage wise, it doesn't really matter. And his shield effect is still fine with those kind of Lightcones, so that's why his Lightcone doesn't have like a significant value. It's still very valuable. But E1 with all-type res pen being one of the rarest buffs to get in the game, it is just insanely valuable and definitely something you should consider over S1. On top of that, E1 is also a stepping stone to his E2, which his E2 is going to be absolutely absurd. Another character where you technically want to go for E2 S0 over E1 S1 or E0 S1 and so on. But now, for reasons why you should actually end up going for either of these, the only time you should really go for either of these are if you know 100% for yourself you are going to use Daneng a lot. Let's say you're still running Sustain Phynon or Sustain Anaxa and you don't really do sustainless runs because maybe you can't. In that case, you definitely can invest into Daneng to make your main DPS stronger, as well as you will now have a sustain that keeps your team alive very well. And also with these further investments such as E1, S1, or even E2, you're going to have a very potent sustain on your team that is going to have no problem keeping your team alive and also have good supportive capabilities, especially with E1 with the all-type res pen increase. That's going to be absolutely bonkers for Phynon and Anaxa. Again, you still can use them in other teams. Like, you can honestly still use them on Dot. You can use them with the hybrid carry Vaishao instead of a follow-up team. But I'm mainly using Anaxa and Phynon as the examples because that is where the teams really do excel. So if you are a main of these teams, you use a sustain and you want to put him on there, then you could definitely consider getting one of these vertical investment options because they are all really good. He has one of the best vertical investments when it comes to a sustain. and is definitely something you can consider. But again, before you do consider it, be sure that you, one, either main these characters, or two, plan on using him a lot, and he's going to be like a character that can potentially turn the tides on your account. Like maybe you can't clear a certain part of endgame and he's going to be the reason that helps. Of course, if he's going to be someone that you know you're going to use for a good amount of time, then of course vertically investing in him is going to be good. And if your only concern is maybe the vertical investment isn't strong enough for you to consider, it is. It is very strong vertical investment. His Lightcone's really good, his E1's even better, and his E2 is bonkers. They are all really good options to consider. And then, of course, if you should skip, would be opposite reasons. Let's say maybe you're not going to use him too much, you don't really have a need for him, you just want to see if it's better than running like a third support on the team. Unfortunately, no. A lot of third support setups are going to just be better unless you're throwing and running someone that doesn't make any sense on there. With vertical investment, he's not going to completely outdo another support. Since, of course, when it comes to support, their main design philosophy is going to be, you know, a support to amplify the main character's damage. Dawning, on the other hand, he does have buffing in his kit that was planned, but his main role is sustaining. So it's not all dumped into support, it's also mainly just dumped into sustaining. So if you're someone that doesn't really plan on using him, you just want to know if he's going to be the one to make your characters do even more damage as opposed to running sustainless. Unfortunately, no, in that case, I would not recommend summoning. And that does wrap it up, going over each early vertical investment option on the new Heng, talking about his Lightcone, his E1 and his E2, E1 or S1, and the reasons why you should or should not pull for them. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the types of Star Wars content, and I'll see you later. Peace out.